The Grand Athenaeum was the largest structure ever built by living hands. It hung in the dead center of the Orion Arm like a silver eye watching the galaxy turn. 43 species sent their representatives there, and for 600 years, the Galactic Concord had used it to settle disputes, make trade deals, and decide the future of civilized space. The chamber at its heart was a massive dome of glass and light, with rising rows of seats arranged in a circle so that every delegation could see every other delegation. It was meant to feel equal. It never did. Some seats were higher than others. Some lights burned brighter. Ambassador Idara Osai stood at the speaker's dais and looked up at all of them. Behind her, the holographic seal of the United Earth Flotilla glowed a soft blue. It was the smallest seal in the chamber and the dimmest. The Valeth seal shone gold and covered half the wall behind their delegation. The Dreth seal pulsed a deep crimson that seemed to breathe. Even the Kelvaxi, a minor species by most standards, had a seal 3 times the size of Earth's. Idara had stood on this dais many times before. She had made requests. She had filed complaints. She had presented research papers and trade proposals and cultural exchange programs. She had smiled when they ignored her. She had kept her voice steady when they talked over her. She had spent 22 years as Earth's ambassador to the Concord, and in all that time, she had never once raised her voice. Today would be no different, but today would be the last time. The chamber was half empty. That was normal when Earth had the floor. The Valeth High Speaker, Sor Talon, sat in his elevated seat with his long silver fingers folded together. He was a tall being, thin as paper, with skin that shifted colors depending on his mood. Right now he was a pale green, which meant boredom. Beside his delegation, the Dreth military commandant Yorvek sat like a carved stone, his broad gray face showing nothing at all. His 4 eyes blinked at different times. Idara activated the data projection. Stars filled the chamber. 11 years ago, she said, Earth's Deep Range Scout program sent 14 ships into the unmapped regions of the Sagittarius Void. Their mission was simple: map the territory, record what they found, come home. She paused. The stars in her projection rotated slowly. 9 of those ships came home. 5 did not. But before they went silent, they sent data, a great deal of data. I have presented portions of this data to the Concord on 6 separate occasions over the past 8 years. Each time, my reports were filed under low-priority research and not reviewed. A few delegates shifted in their seats. Sor Talon's skin flickered from green to a pale yellow, mild interest perhaps, or mild annoyance. Today I am presenting the complete dataset for the final time, Idara said. I will not summarize it. I will not simplify it. I will show you what we found, and I will tell you what it means, and then I will ask you one question. She touched the projection controls. The star map zoomed outward, far beyond the borders of conquered space, deep into the Sagittarius Void. At the very edge of the map, a region of space was marked in red. It was enormous. It covered a stretch of the void nearly 3,000 light-years across, and it was shaped like nothing at all. It was not a circle or a line or a cloud. It was just a region where things had changed. We call it the Hollow, Idara said, not because the region is empty, but because every star system inside this boundary has become empty. There are 47 star systems within this marked area that existed in previous galactic surveys. They are no longer there. The stars are gone. The planets are gone. The dust and gas and debris that should remain after any natural destruction are gone. There is nothing. No radiation. No gravitational echo. No evidence that anything was ever there at all. The chamber was quiet, not the respectful quiet of attention, the empty quiet of people waiting for the boring part to end. Idara continued. She showed them the trajectory models. The wavefront, whatever it was, appeared to be moving, slowly by galactic standards but steadily and without pause. It was moving toward populated space. Her scientists had run the calculations 400 times with every variable they could imagine. The result was always the same. At its current rate of advance, she said, The Hollow will reach the outermost territories of conquered space in approximately 19 years. She let that number hang in the air. 19 years, she repeated. That is not a long time. My daughter is 21. She will be 40 when this reaches us if it does not accelerate, and our models suggest it may be accelerating. Sortalun leaned forward slightly. His skin had gone a deeper yellow. Ambassador Osai, he said, his voice smooth and melodic in the way that Valith voices always were. You are suggesting that an unknown force is erasing star systems from existence and moving in our direction. I am not suggesting it, Idara said. I am showing you the evidence. Talon's mouth curved in what passed for a smile among his kind. And what, precisely, do you propose we do about this evidence? A unified defense initiative, Idara said. She had rehearsed this. She had rehearsed it 1,000 times. Shared research programs, combined fleet deployments along the projected path, a joint early warning network, every species contributing what they can. If we start now, 19 years gives us time. Not much time, but enough to prepare. Talon looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the chamber. Does any delegation wish to respond? Commandant Yorvik spoke first. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel being ground under a boot. The Dreth Strategic Command has reviewed portions of Earth's earlier submissions. Our analysts found the data to be incomplete, speculative, and built on sensor technology that is, respectfully, several generations behind current standards. Idara kept her face still. She had heard this before. Furthermore, Yorvik continued, the request for shared fleet deployment and weapons research cooperation is a transparent attempt by Earth to gain access to military technologies that are restricted from lower-tier member species. We object to this proposal in the strongest terms. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Valith delegation nodded. Two smaller delegations who usually followed the Valith lead nodded as well. Sortalun spoke again, his tone gentle in the way that a teacher speaks to a child who has given the wrong answer. Ambassador Osai, Earth has been a valued member of this Concord, but I must be direct. Your species has been a spacefaring civilization for less than 300 years. The Valith have traveled between stars for 9,000. The Dreth for 6,000. Many species in this chamber have seen threats come and go that would make your hollow look like a passing shadow. He spread his silver hands wide. The dark is large, Ambassador. It contains many strange things, sensor ghosts, gravitational echoes, anomalies that appear and vanish and mean nothing. This is the nature of the void. It is not a monster. It is simply space being space. Soft laughter from several delegations. Idara heard it. She let it pass through her like wind through an open window. With respect, Talon finished, we cannot build a defense against the dark. More laughter, louder this time. The Kelvaxi ambassador covered his mouth to hide his smile. The delegation from the Severi Collective did not bother to hide theirs. Someone in the upper rows made a comment in a language Idara did not speak, and the beings around them erupted in amusement. Idara stood at the dais and waited for the laughter to end. She did not fidget. She did not look down. She had learned long ago that the worst thing you could do in this chamber was show that they had reached you. When the chamber settled, she closed her data files. The stars disappeared. The red boundary of the hollow vanished from the projection. The chamber returned to its normal lighting, all gold and silver and crimson, with Earth's small blue seal glowing quietly behind her. She looked at Sortalun. She looked at Yorvik. She looked across the full sweep of the chamber, at every delegation that had laughed or stayed silent or looked away. We offered our hand, she said. Her voice was calm and clear. Remember that. She stepped off the dais. The Earth delegation rose from their seats, all 9 of them moving together without a word or a signal. They gathered their materials, their data pads, their personal effects. Idara walked up the aisle toward the chamber exit. Her team fell in behind her. Their footsteps were the only sound in the chamber for a few seconds. And then they were not, because someone from the Severi delegation was already calling for the next agenda item. Nobody stopped them, nobody called out to them, nobody asked them to wait. The great doors of the chamber opened, and Idara Osai walked through them for the last time. She did not look back. She did not need to. She already knew what was behind her. She had seen it for 22 years. Behind her in the chamber, the blue seal of the United Earth Flotilla flickered once, like a candle caught in a draft. Then it went dark. The small circle of wall where it had been was just a wall again, blank and gray and unremarkable. The Valith High Speaker glanced at the empty space for a moment. Then he turned back to the chamber and smiled. "Now then," Sor Talon said, "shall we discuss the trade tariff revisions?" In her quarters aboard the Earth transport ship that would carry her home for the last time, Idara Os sat alone and removed her ambassador's pin from her collar. It was a simple thing, a small blue circle with a silver earth at its center. She held it in her palm and closed her fingers around it and allowed herself, for the first time in 22 years, to be tired. Her aide knocked on the door. "Ambassador, we've cleared the station. We're entering the corridor now." "Thank you," Idara said. "Shall I send your withdrawal confirmation to the Concord Secretariat?" Idara looked at the pin in her hand. She thought of Sor Talon's gentle, patronizing smile. She thought of Jorvik's cold, four-eyed stare. She thought of the laughter. She thought of her daughter, who was 21 years old and did not yet know what was coming. "Yes," she said, "send it and then close the channel." "Permanently. Permanently." The aide hesitated for just a moment. Then she nodded and left. Idara placed the pin on the small table beside her bed. She turned to the viewport and watched the stars streak by as the ship entered hyperspace. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of every map, something was moving through the dark, and it was patient, and it was vast, and it did not care whether anyone believed in it or not. She closed her eyes and let the hum of the ship carry her forward. There was a great deal of work to be done, and not much time to do it, and no one was going to help. That was fine. Humanity had never needed permission to survive. In the weeks after Earth withdrew from the Galactic Concord, the galaxy did what it always did with small things. It made jokes. The Valith media networks were the first. They were the largest entertainment producers in the Orion Arm, and they had an audience of trillions across 100 worlds. Within days of Earth's departure, a popular political commentator named Selax Ven ran a segment titled, "The Humans Think the Dark is Coming to Eat Them." It played to enormous ratings. Selax stood on his broadcast stage, arms spread wide, his color-shifting skin cycling through shades of amusement, and told his audience that the youngest species in the Concord had finally shown its true nature. Fearful, primitive, jumping at shadows. "They looked into the void," Selax said, his voice dripping with theatrical concern, "and the void looked back, and they ran home to hide under their beds." The audience laughed. They laughed for a long time. Within a month, a comedy series called Hollow Fears appeared on the Valith Entertainment networks. It followed a crew of bumbling human explorers who traveled through space, getting frightened by everything they encountered. Asteroids, nebulae, their own sensor readings. Each episode ended with the humans screaming and running while their alien companions watched in embarrassment. It ran for 2 seasons and won 3 broadcast awards. The Dreth were less creative in their mockery but no less thorough. In their military academies, where cadets trained for years to become the feared warriors of the Concord's largest fighting force, a new piece of slang entered the vocabulary. Pulling an Osai meant overreacting to a situation. If a cadet panicked during a simulation, if a soldier flinched during live-fire training, the instructor would say, "Don't pull an Osai." It got a laugh every time. Academic papers appeared across the galaxy, written by scientists from half a dozen species, each one explaining why the hollow was nothing. Sensor noise, hyperspace echoes, Statistical errors from human instruments that were, after all, built with technology the conquered considered second-rate. One particularly popular paper, published by a Valith astrophysicist, was titled An Analysis of Methodological Failures in Human Deep Range Survey Techniques. It was cited hundreds of times. The author had not actually examined the full dataset. Neither had anyone who cited it. The jokes were everywhere. And because the jokes were everywhere, nobody had to think about what Idara Osai had actually said. That was the point, of course. That was always the point of laughter. It was not a response. It was a wall. Sor Talon did not laugh. He was not a cruel being, and he did not enjoy the mockery, though he did nothing to stop it. In his private chambers aboard the Athenium, the Valith High Speaker sat with his long silver hands resting on his desk and thought carefully about what had happened. He had known Idara Osai for many years. She was not a fool. She was not given to panic or exaggeration. In all his dealings with her, she had been precise, patient, and measured. These were qualities he admired even in a human, especially in a human. But she was wrong. She had to be wrong. The alternative was unthinkable. If something truly was erasing star systems and moving toward populated space, and if the conquered had dismissed the warning and mocked the only species that had detected it, then the consequences would be beyond calculation. Talon could not allow himself to think that way. The weight of it would crush him. So he filed the data. He placed Idara's complete dataset in the Concord's low-priority research archive, which was the polite way of burying something without deleting it. He told himself that someday, when resources allowed, a proper review would be conducted. He almost believed it. Commandant Jorvik, in his stone-gray office aboard the Dreth Military Command Station, had a slightly different reaction. He was uneasy, not frightened. The Dreth did not frighten easily, and Jorvik had personally commanded forces in 3 border conflicts, but uneasy in the way that a soldier becomes uneasy when the terrain does not match the map. He had dismissed Idara's proposal publicly. That was politics, but privately something about the data bothered him. The patterns were too clean. If the data had been fabricated to support a political agenda, there would be signs of manipulation, and his analysts would have found them. Instead, the data simply looked like what it claimed to be: careful observations of something enormous and unexplainable. Jorvik assigned a junior analyst named Threk to conduct a quiet, unofficial review of the human data. Threk was young, talented, and terrified of standing out. He looked at the data for 2 weeks, produced a 5-page report that concluded the findings were inconclusive and likely attributable to known sensor limitations, and filed it. It was the safe answer. It was the answer that would not attract attention or end a career. Jorvik read the report. He felt the unease again, but he had a fleet to run and borders to maintain and a political structure that rewarded certainty and punished doubt. He set the report aside and moved on. The data sat unread. The laughter continued. And through it all, quietly, without anyone noticing, humanity began to leave. It started with the small things. A human cultural attaché on a Valith academic station packed her belongings and booked passage home. She told her colleagues she was taking an extended leave. She did not mention that she had no intention of returning. A human science team working on a joint research project with Kelvaxi biologists finished their current paper, delivered their notes, thanked their partners, and departed on the next transport to Sol. The Kelvaxi researchers assumed they would be replaced. No replacements came. Human merchants continued their trade routes. Cargo ships still docked at alien stations, still delivered their goods, still paid their fees. But the ships only flew in one direction. They went out from Sol loaded with trade goods, made their deliveries, and returned home empty. No new orders were placed. No new contracts were signed. The humans paid every debt, honored every agreement, and then quietly ended every relationship. On alien stations across the galaxy, the small human communities that had existed for decades began to thin. A restaurant closed. An apartment was returned to its landlord, cleaned and empty. A child said goodbye to their friends at school and did not come back the next day. None of it was dramatic. None of it was announced. It was the quietest withdrawal in galactic history. A Valith dockmaster named Solon, who had worked the freight terminals on Station Vera 6 for 30 years, was the first alien to notice the pattern. She kept careful records, because that was her job, and one evening, while reviewing the month's shipping logs, she realized that every human merchant ship that had docked in the past 90 days had departed toward Sol. That was not unusual by itself. What was unusual was that none of them had come back. She checked the broader network. Human-registered vessels were moving through the major hyperspace corridors in a steady flow, all heading inward, all heading home. It was not a rush. There was no panic, but the pattern was there, clear as a current in a river, if you knew to look. Solon filed a report with the station authority. It was noted and forgotten. In the outer colonies, human navigational beacons began going offline. These were small devices, planted decades ago on asteroids and moons and dead worlds, broadcasting simple location signals that helped ships navigate through poorly mapped regions. They were not important. Nobody relied on them except the humans who had placed them. But they had been burning steadily for years, some of them for half a century, and now, one by one, they were winking out. A Dreth border patrol officer named Kennak noticed the beacon shutdowns during a routine scan. He logged it as a maintenance issue and moved on with his patrol. 3 days later, he noticed that 2 more beacons had gone dark. A week after that, 5 more. He flagged it in his weekly report. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody was trying to. The galaxy had already decided what humans were: small, frightened, primitive. And so the evidence of something else happening, something deliberate and coordinated and vast, simply did not register. Sor Talon, in his role as High Speaker, received weekly summaries of galactic activity from the Concord's Information Bureau. Somewhere in those summaries, buried between trade statistics and diplomatic updates, the dockmaster's report and the border officer's beacon logs existed as data points. Talon did not read them. He had a galaxy to manage. He hosted a diplomatic reception 3 months after Earth's withdrawal. It was a grand affair, held in the Athenaeum's ceremonial hall, with delegations from 30 species in attendance. The food was exquisite. The music was composed by a Valith artist who had won the galaxy's highest cultural prize. The lighting was warm and golden, and designed to make everyone feel important. Talon stood at the center of the reception with a glass of Valith crystal wine in his long fingers. His skin was a contented blue. He was surrounded by diplomats and dignitaries, and the conversation was light and easy, and for a moment the galaxy felt like the orderly, manageable place he needed it to be. Someone brought up the humans. It was inevitable. They were still the galaxy's favorite joke. Talon smiled. He raised his glass. "To our friends from Earth," he said, and his voice carried just enough warmth to sound generous. "May they find peace in their small corner of the galaxy, far from the terrible ghost in the dark." The room laughed. Glasses were raised. The toast was made. Behind Talon, through the tall viewport that dominated the far wall of the ceremonial hall, the stars of the Orion Arm burned in their ancient patterns. They were beautiful, as they always were, 1,000,000 points of light scattered across the black like diamonds on velvet. Talon did not see what happened next. He was facing the room, smiling, accepting compliments on his toast, but a Kelvaxi diplomat standing near the viewport saw it. She had been looking out at the stars with the idle gaze of someone whose mind was elsewhere, and she saw one of the lights, a distant point near the bottom of the viewport that she had never paid attention to before, simply go out. It did not flicker, it did not fade. It was there and then it was not. She blinked. She looked at the space where it had been. There was nothing, just darkness where a small, steady light had burned a moment before. It was a human navigational beacon. It had been operating for 81 years, placed by one of Earth's first deep space expeditions, and it had just been shut down. The Kelvaxi diplomat stared at the empty spot for a few seconds. Then someone touched her arm and offered her a drink, and she turned away from the viewport and forgot about it. Behind her in the dark, another small light went out, and then another. Nobody noticed. The humans were almost gone now, and the galaxy was still laughing. The last human ship to dock at an alien station was a small cargo freighter called the Dawnkeeper. It arrived at Station Kelos 9, a Valith trade hub on the outer edge of the Orion Corridor, at 14:22 Galactic Standard Time on a day that seemed like every other day. The ship was carrying a load of synthetic textiles, a modest cargo worth a modest profit. The captain was a woman named Reina Vasquez. She was 53 years old. She had been running trade routes between Sol and the outer stations for 20 years. She docked the Dawnkeeper in Bay 17. She paid her docking fee. She signed the cargo manifest and submitted it to the station's trade office. Then she walked to the station's central market, bought a bag of Kelvaxi spice candy that she had always liked, and returned to her ship. The station controller on duty that afternoon was a young Valith named Terran. He watched the Dawnkeeper's transponder signal on his screen as it powered up its engines and requested departure clearance. He granted it without thinking. Human merchant ships came and went all the time. "Safe travels, Dawnkeeper," Terran said over the comm channel. It was what he said to every departing ship. There was a pause. Then Reina Vasquez's voice came back, warm and quiet. "Thank you, Kelos 9. It's been a real pleasure. Take care of yourselves." Terran thought that was an odd thing to say. Trade captains did not usually say things like that. They said copy, or acknowledged, or sometimes nothing at all. But the moment passed, and the Dawnkeeper pulled away from the station and entered the hyperspace corridor toward Sol, and Terran moved on to the next ship in his queue. He did not know that he was the last alien to speak to a human being for a very long time. At midnight Galactic Standard Time, the galaxy changed. There was no warning, no build-up, no sequence of events that anyone could later point to and say, that was when it started. It happened all at once, across the entire galaxy, in a single instant that lasted less than a heartbeat. Every human ship disappeared. Not one by one, not in groups, not in a wave that moved from one region to the next. Every single human-registered vessel in the galaxy, 4,271 ships of every size and type, from single-pilot scout craft to massive cargo haulers, vanished from every tracking system simultaneously. Their transponder signals did not fade. Their engines did not power down. Their courses did not change. The signals were there, and then they were not, as if someone had reached into the fabric of space and simply removed them. Station controllers across the galaxy stared at their screens. Red alerts fired on 100 stations. Communication channels erupted with confusion. Kelos 9 to any Earth-registered vessel, please respond. Dreth Border Command to human patrol ships in Sector 7, confirm status. Athenium Central to United Earth Flotilla, this is an emergency hail. Respond on any frequency. Nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that was not just the absence of sound but the absence of presence, as if the thing you were calling to had never existed in the first place. Terran was still on duty when it happened. He watched the Dawnkeeper's transponder dot blink out of existence on his screen, along with every other human signal in his sector. His hands shook. He ran the system diagnostic 3 times, certain it was a malfunction. The system was fine. The ships were simply gone. The Conquered Emergency Response Bureau activated for the first time in 40 years. It was an organization that most diplomats had forgotten existed, staffed by bureaucrats who had spent their entire careers hoping nothing would ever require their attention. Now something did, and they were not ready. Theories exploded across every communication network. A mass mechanical failure, a coordinated self-destruct, a new form of cloaking technology, An enemy attack by an unknown force. Each theory was proposed, debated, and discarded within hours. None of them fit. The Valith dispatched fast survey ships to the last known coordinates of the nearest human vessels. They found nothing. Not wreckage, not energy signatures, not the faint traces of engine exhaust that lingered in space for days after a ship passed through. There was nothing. The ships had not been destroyed. They had not been moved. They were simply not there. Commandant Jorvik received the emergency report aboard the Dreth military command station. He read it twice. Then he called for the junior analyst Threk. Threk arrived white-faced and trembling. He knew why he had been summoned. "The report you wrote," Jorvik said. "The one about the human data. The one that said their findings were inconclusive." "Yes, Commandant." "Was it accurate?" Threk opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The data was unusual, Commandant. There were patterns I could not explain, but the conclusion was what was expected." Jorvik looked at the young analyst for a long time with all four of his gray eyes. He did not speak. He did not need to. Threk understood. The report had been written to avoid trouble. It had been written to tell superiors what they wanted to hear. And now 4,000 ships and 11 billion human beings had vanished from the galaxy, and the only species that had seen something coming was the one they had all laughed at. Sor Talon convened an emergency session of the Concord within 6 hours. The chamber was full for the first time in years. Every delegation was present. Every seat was occupied. The air had the sharp, electric quality of fear. Talon stood at the speaker's dais, in the same spot where Idara Osai had stood months before, and addressed the chamber. His skin was a color that few in the room had ever seen on him before, a deep, dark gray that meant something close to dread. "The situation is as follows," he said. "At 0000 GST, all human-registered vessels in Concord monitored space cease to exist on our tracking systems. All attempts at communication have failed. Survey ships dispatched to last known coordinates have found no evidence of the vessels. Additionally," he paused, the chamber was silent. "Additionally, the hyperspace corridor connecting Sol to the broader galactic network is gone." The silence became something heavier, something with weight. "Not collapsed," Talon continued. "Not blocked or destabilized. The corridor has been disassembled at a subspace level. Our physicists have examined the region where it existed and confirmed that the underlying structure of space in that area has been altered in a way that, according to their current understanding, should not be possible." A Dreth general in the upper rows spoke. "Should not be possible for whom?" Talon looked at her. "For anyone," he said. "For any known species, for any technology in our records." The murmuring began. It rolled through the chamber like distant thunder. After the session, Talon returned to his private office and did something he should have done months ago. He went to the Concord's low-priority research archive and pulled up Idara Osai's complete dataset. All of it. Every file, every appendix, every footnote. He sat at his desk and read. He read for 9 hours straight. He did not eat. He did not drink. He did not take breaks. His skin cycled through a dozen shades of color as he absorbed what the humans had been trying to tell them. The surface data was what Idara had presented in the chamber: observations of the hollow, trajectory models, threat assessments. It was alarming but straightforward. The kind of data that any competent species might gather if they had been looking in the right direction. But the appendices were something else entirely. Buried beneath the observational data, filed under the kind of dry, technical labels that discouraged casual reading, were the theoretical models. Human theoretical models. Work that had been done quietly, over decades, in research institutions that the Concord had classified as minor and unremarkable. Talon found papers on subspace corridor manipulation. Not the basic principles that the Valith had mastered thousands of years ago, but something far beyond that. The humans had developed a theoretical framework for constructing, deconstructing, and reconstructing the fundamental architecture of hyperspace corridors. The math was dense and unfamiliar, built on mathematical approaches that Talon had never seen before, but the conclusions were clear. He found research on mass coordinate translocation, the synchronized movement of large numbers of objects across vast distances in a single instant. The Valith could move a ship through hyperspace. The humans had been developing the theory to move everything, everywhere, all at once. And then he found the file labeled Veil Step Architecture. He read it 3 times. He did not understand all of it. He was a politician, not a physicist, but he understood enough to feel the floor drop out from under his world. The humans had not been behind. They had never been behind. The technology they had shown the galaxy, the ships and weapons and sensors that the conquered had classified as second-rate and primitive, had been a fraction of what they possessed. The surface, the part they had been willing to share. Beneath it, out of sight, they had been building something that the galaxy's oldest and most advanced civilizations had not even imagined was possible. Talon sat back in his chair. His skin had gone white. Pure, blank, empty white, the Valith color of absolute shock. He thought about Idara standing on the dais. He thought about her calm voice and her steady eyes, and the 7 words she had spoken before she left. "We offered our hand, remember that." He had thought it was the last protest of a defeated species, a parting shot from someone who had lost. Now, sitting in his office with the theoretical blueprints of an impossible technology glowing on his screen, he understood what it had actually been. It had been mercy. Across the galaxy, in the Dreth Strategic Command Center, Jorvik stood before a galactic map that covered an entire wall. He had ordered his staff to update it. Every red dot that had represented a human vessel, colony, outpost, or installation had been removed. The map now showed the galaxy as it had looked before humanity had ever been contacted. Clean, complete, as if they had never been there at all. Jorvik stared at the map. Behind him, Threk stood in silence, pale and sick with the understanding of what his safe, careful, career-protecting report had cost. On the far edge of the map, in the Sagittarius void, past the boundary of explored space, something flickered on the long-range sensors. A brief pulse, a shadow of a signal, the kind of thing a careful analyst would investigate, the kind of thing a frightened one would ignore. Jorvik turned to Threk. "Give me everything the humans ever filed with us," he said. "Everything. Every report, every data file, every research paper, every footnote. I want it all on my desk by morning." "Yes, Commandant." Jorvik turned back to the map. The flickering on the edge was gone now, but the Sagittarius void, that enormous dark region at the edge of the known galaxy, seemed larger than it had yesterday. Or perhaps it was the same size, and the galaxy had gotten smaller. 2 years passed. The galaxy tried to forget about the humans. It could not. Every few weeks, a new theory appeared about where they had gone. They had destroyed themselves. They had been taken by an unknown enemy. They had developed some form of faster-than-light travel and fled to another galaxy entirely. Each theory had its believers and its critics, and none of them could be proven, because there was no evidence to examine. The humans were simply gone, as completely as if the universe had closed a door behind them. Sor Talon, who was no longer High Speaker, spent his days in a small office on the lower levels of the Athenium. He had not been removed from his position by force. He had resigned. The weight of what he had failed to see had settled on him like a stone, and he could not carry it and the responsibilities of his office at the same time. The new High Speaker was a younger Valith named Aresi, who was competent and careful, and had no interest in revisiting the human question. Talon did not stop working. He simply changed what he worked on. Every day he sat at his desk and studied the files that Idara Osa had left behind. The Veil Step architecture, the theoretical models, the math that he could only partially understand. He brought in physicists. He begged them to look at the data. Most refused. The few who agreed came back shaken and quiet and said things like, "This should not be possible, and we have nothing that even approaches this." Jorvik continued to command the Dreth military. He did not resign. The Dreth did not believe in stepping down from duty because of mistakes. Instead, Jorvik carried his mistake like a scar and used it to stay sharp. He tripled the resources assigned to deep space monitoring. He ordered long-range sensor sweeps of the Sagittarius Void every 12 hours. He received the data personally and reviewed it himself. Threk, the junior analyst who had written the dismissive report, was now Jorvik's chief intelligence officer. The young man had not slept well in 2 years. It was Threk who saw it first. The data came in during a routine sweep. A star system on the far edge of conquered territory in the Kelvaxi border region had stopped transmitting. The system was called Thesson 4. It contained 3 habitable moons, 400 million Kelvaxi residents, an orbital defense grid, and a modest commercial fleet. It was not a major system, but it was a real place where real people lived and worked and raised their children. And now it was not there. Threk ran the scan again. He checked the equipment. He contacted the nearest relay station and requested independent confirmation. The confirmation came back in minutes. The star that Thesson 4 orbited was gone. The 3 moons were gone. The defense grid, the commercial fleet, the 400 million people, all gone. In the place where the system had been, there was nothing. No debris, no radiation, no gravitational echo, just empty space, as clean and blank as if nothing had ever been there. The Hollow had arrived, 7 years ahead of Idera Osai's projected timeline. Threk's hands were steady when he delivered the report to Jorvik. He had learned in the past 2 years that steadiness was more important than courage. Courage was about facing what you feared. Steadiness was about functioning while you faced it. Jorvik read the report. He set it down. He looked at Threk. "How fast is it moving?" "It is accelerating, Commandant. Based on our current projections, it has increased its speed by a factor of 3 since the humans first detected it. Time to the next populated system." 4 months. Jorvik closed his 4 eyes all at the same time, which was something he almost never did. Then he opened them and reached for his command console. "Get me the Conquered," he said. "Every delegation, emergency session, now." The galaxy's response to the Hollow was everything that humanity's response had not been. It was loud, chaotic, and late. 3 more systems vanished in the following months. Each disappearance was identical. One day the system existed. The next day it did not. No warning, no sound, no flash of light. The systems did not explode or collapse or burn. They simply ceased to be, as if the universe had erased them and smoothed over the space where they had been. Panic spread across the Conquered. Species that had not agreed on anything in centuries began shouting at each other across the chamber. Some demanded military action. Some demanded evacuation. Some demanded that the Conquered find the humans and bring them back, as if humanity owed them a rescue. The Dreth, to their credit, acted. Commandant Jorvik assembled the largest military fleet in galactic history, 12,000 warships, carrying millions of soldiers, equipped with the most powerful weapons the Conquered had ever produced. He deployed them along the projected path of the Hollow, a defensive wall of fire and steel stretching across 100 light years. The fleet held position for 17 hours. Then it disappeared. 12,000 warships, millions of lives, the greatest concentration of military power the galaxy had ever seen, gone in an instant. The long-range sensors showed the perimeter as empty space. The ships had not fired a single weapon. There were no energy signatures of combat, no distress signals, no escape pods. The fleet had not fought and it had not fled. It had simply been unmade, as casually as a hand wiping dust from a table. Jorvik received the report standing up, because he knew that if he was sitting down, he might not be able to stand again. He had sent those ships. He had ordered those crews to their positions. He had looked their commanders in the eyes and told them to hold the line. And the line had not held. The line had not even existed as far as the hollow was concerned. In his small office on the lower levels of the Athenium, Talon worked faster now. He was no longer studying the human data out of guilt. He was studying it because it was the only thing left that might matter. He gathered the Concord's best scientists, the ones who had finally agreed to look at the human research, and together they reconstructed what Earth's scientists had spent decades piecing together. The picture that emerged was not what anyone had expected. The hollow was not a weapon. It was not an invasion. It was not an act of war by some distant enemy. It was a migration. Something was moving through the galaxy. Something so vast, so old, and so fundamentally different from anything the Concord had ever encountered that the word creature did not apply. Neither did intelligence or entity or any other word that implied something that could be reasoned with or understood. The hollow was the movement of something that existed on a scale so enormous that individual star systems were beneath its notice. It did not destroy stars. It did not consume planets. It simply moved through the space they occupied, and when it passed, that space was no longer compatible with the matter that had been there. The stars and planets did not die. They were replaced, the way a wave replaces the shape of sand on a beach, without malice, without intent, without even awareness that the sand had been there at all. It could not be fought. It could not be negotiated with. It could not be stopped, redirected, or slowed. It was not alive in any way that the word alive meant. It was simply something that existed, and it was moving, and everything in its path would cease to exist as it passed. The human scientists had understood this. They had understood it decades ago, long before Idaros ever stood on the speaker's dais, and they had done what humans always did when they understood a problem that could not be solved by fighting. They had found a way around it. Talon finally understood the veil step architecture. It was not a weapon. It was not a shield. It was a door. The humans had discovered that reality had layers. Beneath the universe that everyone lived in, beneath the fabric of normal space, there was another layer, a subdimensional space that existed like the foundation beneath a building. It was always there. It had always been there. But reaching it required mathematics and engineering that no species in the Concord had ever attempted. The humans had not only attempted it, they had built it. Every primitive navigational beacon that had been burning in deep space for decades, every unremarkable satellite orbiting minor moons, every piece of second-rate human technology scattered across the galaxy, all of it had been a node in a vast, hidden network. The humans had been building their escape route in plain sight, under the noses of every species that had dismissed them as backward for decades. When they vanished, they had not been destroyed. They had stepped sideways through the door they had built into the layer beneath reality where the hollow could not follow. And they had built the door big enough for everyone. That was the part that broke Talon. In the ruins of Earth's abandoned embassy on the Athenium, sealed behind a door that required a Concord override code to open, he found a data crystal sitting on the desk where Idaros had once worked. It was small and unassuming, the kind of standard data storage that could be bought at any trade station. It was time-locked, set to become readable 5 years after the date of Earth's withdrawal from the Concord. 5 years to the day, the humans had planned even that. Talon activated the crystal. Idara's face appeared in the projection. She looked older than the last time he had seen her. There were lines around her eyes that had not been there before, and her hair, which had been black, was now streaked with gray. But her eyes were the same, steady, patient, the eyes of someone who had seen what was coming and had kept moving anyway. "If you are watching this," Idara said, "then you have seen the hollow and you know that what we told you was true. I am not recording this to say that we were right. That does not matter now." She paused. She seemed to gather herself. "We built a way out. We call it the veil step. It is a method of moving an entire civilization into a subdimensional layer that exists beneath normal space. The hollow cannot reach it. We have tested this. We are certain. Another pause, longer this time. We built the door big enough for everyone, all 43 species. Every civilization in the conquered. We did this because it was the right thing to do, and because we are human, and because that is what we do. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. A weight, a weariness, the sound of someone who had carried a burden for a very long time. The complete schematics for the Veilstep architecture are contained in this crystal. Everything you need to build your own door is here. The math, the engineering, the construction protocols, the safety procedures, all of it. Whether you can build it in time is no longer our burden to carry. She looked directly into the recorder, directly at whoever would watch this, directly at Talon, though she could not have known it would be him. "We offered our hand," she said. "We hope you remember." The recording ended. The room was silent. Talon held the crystal in both hands. They were shaking. Outside the embassy, alarms were sounding across the Athenium. Another system had gone dark. This one was only 200 light-years from the Veilith homeworld. Through the viewport of the embassy, the stars still shone, but there were fewer of them than there had been yesterday. He pressed the crystal against his chest and closed his eyes. Then he stood up and went to find the people who could build the door. The galaxy had 19 years and it wasted most of them. Now it had months. The Veilstep schematics that Idara Osai had left behind were brilliant. They were also designed by humans, for humans, using human mathematics and human engineering principles. For a galaxy that had spent a century dismissing human science as primitive and derivative, this was the cruelest possible lesson. The only technology that could save them was built on a foundation they had refused to study. Veilith physicists, the most celebrated minds in the conquered, opened the schematics and could not read them. Not because the files were damaged or encrypted, because the mathematical framework was alien to them. Human math did not work the way Veilith math worked. It was not inferior. It was not superior. It was different, built from different assumptions, structured around different intuitions, approaching the same universe from a completely different angle. And it was this difference, this quality that the conquered had always dismissed as a sign of human primitiveness, that had allowed Earth's scientists to see what no one else could see and build what no one else could build. The Veilith had to learn to think like humans. The irony was so bitter that Talon could taste it. He became the driving force behind the project. He was no longer High Speaker, and he held no official title, but he had something more valuable, the guilt that would not let him rest, and the knowledge that he had personally helped dismiss the only warning that could have saved them. He worked 20-hour days. He begged, persuaded, and shamed the conquered scientists into studying the schematics. He stood in front of delegations that had laughed at Idara Osai and told them, in plain language, that if they did not learn to read human mathematics within the next few months, their entire species would cease to exist. They learned. Old rivalries collapsed overnight. The Veilith shared their manufacturing capacity, opening their factory worlds to any species that could contribute. The Dreth, who had lost their greatest fleet to the Hollow, stripped their remaining warships for raw materials and dedicated their entire military logistics network to construction. Mining colonies worked around the clock. Research stations that had been pursuing decades-long studies abandoned everything and turned their attention to the Veilstep. The smaller species stepped forward in ways that no one expected. The Kelvaxi, who had lost Thesson 4 and 400 million of their people, drove the construction effort with a fierce, grief-fueled intensity that put the larger civilizations to shame. Their engineers worked until they collapsed, slept for a few hours on the factory floors, and went back to work. They did not complain. They did not argue. They simply built. A Sevari mathematician, a member of the species that had laughed loudest at Idara's presentation, solved the critical translation problem that allowed Veilith engineering systems to interface with human mathematical frameworks. She worked for 11 days straight without sleep and published her solution with a single note attached. For Ambassador Osai, with apology. The Veil Step network required thousands of nodes spread across populated space, each one a complex device that had to be built to precise human specifications and calibrated to tolerances that most conquered manufacturing systems had never attempted. The humans had spent decades building their network in secret. The conquered had to build theirs in months. They did it, barely, imperfectly, with hands that shook and hearts that raced and the knowledge that every day brought the hollow closer. Commandant Jorvik, who had lost 12,000 ships and carried the names of their crews in his memory like stones in his chest, volunteered for the task that no one else wanted. Someone had to buy time. The hollow was accelerating as it moved into populated space, drawn by some quality of inhabited systems that the scientists could not fully explain. Jorvik proposed a theory, one that he credited to human-style thinking, that the wavefront might be drawn to energy density. If that was true, then decoys, artificial concentrations of energy designed to mimic populated systems, might divert its path toward empty space. It was a guess. There was no data to support it. There was no time to test it. It was the kind of decision that a human would make, based on instinct and incomplete information, and the willingness to be wrong if there was even a small chance of being right. Jorvik took a skeleton fleet of 47 ships, crewed by volunteers who understood that they might not come back, and flew to the projected path of the hollow. They deployed a network of energy decoys across a region of empty space, massive generators that pumped out energy signatures designed to look like thriving star systems. Then they waited. The hollow shifted. Slowly, like a river finding a new channel, the wavefront's advance curved toward the decoys and away from the populated systems in its path. It was not a permanent solution. The decoys would burn out eventually, and the hollow would resume its original course. But it bought time. 11 months. 11 months that the galaxy would not have had otherwise. Jorvik wept in the command chair of his flagship when the sensor data confirmed the course change. He wept openly, with all 4 of his gray eyes in front of his entire bridge crew. The Dreth did not weep. It was not part of their culture. It was not something their soldiers did. Jorvik did it anyway. His crew pretended not to see, and then, one by one, they stopped pretending because some of them were weeping too. The Veil Step network was completed on a day that no one would ever forget. It was not elegant. It was not seamless. The nodes were a patchwork of technologies from a dozen species, held together by human math and alien engineering, and a level of desperate cooperation that the conquered had never achieved in 600 years of polite diplomacy. When they activated it, the transition was nothing like what the humans had experienced. The human vanishing had been silent and instantaneous, the product of decades of preparation, and a network that had been tested and refined and perfected before it was ever used. The conquered's version was violent. The sky tore open. That was what it looked like from the surface of 100 worlds. The sky split along a line that burned white, and through the split something else was visible, something that was not sky and not space but something deeper, something underneath. The ground shook. Buildings cracked. Oceans sloshed against their shores. Billions of beings across the galaxy looked up and saw reality itself come apart at the seams. And then they fell through. The transition lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds of noise and light and terror, of the universe groaning like a ship in a storm, of children screaming and parents holding them and soldiers gripping their consoles and praying to gods they were not sure existed. Then it was over. The noise stopped. The shaking stopped. The light settled into something warm and strange and unlike anything any of them had ever seen. They were through. The subdimensional space beneath reality was not what anyone had expected. It was not dark. It was not empty. It was vast, impossibly vast, stretching in every direction in geometries that the eye could not quite follow. The light came from everywhere and nowhere, a warm golden glow that had no source but filled every space. The air, if it could be called air, hummed with a low, steady frequency that was felt in the chest more than heard in the ears. And the humans were already there. Not hiding, not waiting, building. In the years since the vanishing, humanity had been busy. The subdimensional space was not a cave to hide in. It was a canvas, and the humans had been painting on it with everything they had. Structures of light and matter hung in the impossible geometry, cities that did not obey the rules of normal architecture because the rules were different here. Farms grew food from energy patterns that the subdimensional space provided freely. Water flowed in channels that curved upward and sideways, and still somehow arrived where it was needed. Power systems hummed with a clean, quiet energy that seemed to come from the fabric of the space itself. There were children, human children, playing in gravity wells that had been shaped into playgrounds, running and laughing and chasing each other through spaces that bent in ways that would have been impossible in normal reality. They were not frightened. They were not hiding. They were home. And at the center of it all, burning bright and steady, was a beacon. It broadcast on every frequency, in every language that humanity had ever learned, in every direction that this strange space allowed. The message was simple. The door is open. You are welcome here. The refugee ships from the conquered began arriving in waves. Valith transports, Dreth military vessels, stripped of weapons and packed with civilians. Kelvaxi colony ships, overloaded and barely holding together. Sevari, Thessani, Morakine, species whose names most humans had never learned, pouring through the door that humanity had built and left open. Human teams met every ship. They guided them to landing zones. They provided food, water, shelter, and medical care. They did it efficiently and without fanfare, the way people do things they have been planning for a long time. Talon arrived on one of the last transports. He was old now. The years of guilt and work and sleepless nights had aged him beyond what should have been possible for a Valith. His skin, which had once shifted through every color of his emotional range, had settled into a permanent pale gray that he no longer tried to change. He stepped off the transport ramp and into the golden light of the Undercity. He stood there for a moment, unsteady on his feet, looking at what the humans had built. The structures, the gardens, the children playing, the beacon burning at the center of it all, endlessly repeating its message of welcome. He looked at all of it and he understood, finally and completely, what humanity had always been. Not the weakest species in the conquered, not the most primitive, the most frightened, the most laughable. Humanity had been the most patient, the most stubborn, the most unwilling to let others die for the crime of not listening. They had been mocked, dismissed, and ignored, and they had still built the door big enough for everyone. Idara Osai was waiting at the threshold. She was older too. Her hair was fully gray now, and she leaned on a cane that she had not needed when she stood on the speaker's dais all those years ago. But she was standing. She was there. Talon walked toward her. His steps were slow and uneven. When he reached her, he stopped. He opened his mouth to speak. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to say that he was sorry, that he had been blind, that his arrogance and the arrogance of his entire civilization had cost lives that should not have been lost. He wanted to find the words that would make it right, even though he knew that no words could. Idara raised her hand and stopped him. "You're here," she said. Her voice was the same, calm, steady, patient. "That's enough." She held out her hand. Talon looked at it. A human hand, small and fragile-looking and stronger than anything he had ever encountered. The hand that had been offered once before, in a chamber full of laughter, and rejected. He took it. Around them, the Undercity hummed with life. Alien species who had never walked beside humans walked beside them now, through corridors of light, under a sky that was not a sky but something deeper and more enduring. Above them, visible through the shimmering barrier that separated this place from the universe they had left behind, the old reality was visible. Stars still burned up there, but fewer of them every day. The hollow moved across the face of the old universe like a slow tide, silent and patient, and vast beyond comprehension. But down here, beneath the skin of the world, in the place that humanity had found and built and opened to everyone, even those who had laughed at them, the lights were warm. The air was clean. The beacon still burned at the center of everything, repeating its message to anyone who had not yet arrived. The door is open. You are welcome here. Somewhere in the Undercity, in a small park that human engineers had built beside a Kelvaxi residential block, a human child was teaching a Valith child how to throw a ball. The Valith child's long silver fingers kept dropping it, and both of them were laughing. A Dreth soldier sat on a bench nearby, watching them with all four of his eyes, and on his broad gray face there was an expression that no Dreth word existed for, but that humans would have recognized immediately. Hope. The galaxy above was ending, but civilization, that stubborn and fractured and ridiculous and beautiful thing that every species carried inside itself like a candle in the dark, was enduring. It was enduring because a small, fragile, patient species had looked at the stars and decided that no one should face the dark alone.